We have a massive trade update as Daryl Morey looks to be added again. Speculation is rising around the NBA Combine that Paul George's future in Philadelphia is not as certain, with some speculating that Kevin Durant could be in play for a Philadelphia 76ers trade. I want to break down exactly what this means from the Sixers perspective, my thoughts on what this could even look like, and if it is worth taking this big of a swing based on the context of this Sixers team. So let's get right into things today, and do want to start off with this initial report. This coming from Draft Express here, Jeremy Woo, and the initial tweet from NBA Central says the Sixers could target Kevin Durant or Lauri Markkanen with a package that includes Paul George and the number 3 pick, per Jeremy Woo and Draft Express. Quote, some teams expect the Sixers to be active in trade conversations with names such as Kevin Durant and Lauri Markkanen as potential targets in packages that could include Paul George and the number 3 overall pick. Now, a lot to get into here. I'm not here to argue that Paul George is better than Kevin Durant or Lauri Markkanen. That is not my position on it, but how do I feel is I don't think this is something that would be worth it from the Sixers perspective. The number one goal of this draft should be to walk away with a player that can be a part of the long-term future. That the Sixers are still invested in this core of Joel Embiid, of Paul George, that they do have to have these win now intentions with this being said, but you have to have the long-term view in mind, and they have done a nice job laying the foundation for long-term success here. Tyrese Maxey is a key part of that future. That Jared McCain has established himself as a part of this future. Quentin Grimes looks to have carved out a niche here. That is 3 key players under the age of 24 that you're beginning to build something there, and that is something I think is worth continuing on. Now, to provide a little bit more context here, and then I do want to dive into the contractual situations as well as the abilities of each of these guys here, I do want to add this other part of the report here. And shout out to our guy, Philly Sixers Galaxy, who tweets out a portion of the same article, but finished it up with this line here saying, Daryl Morey has made a career of being active and aggressive on the trade front, but historically, it's rare to see a top 3 player or a top 3 pick being traded. And the reason that is the case, because it is so valuable to get to the spot. We lived through the sins of this season, the worst season in Sixers history that I can remember, that including the process years, which we had hope. We had a long-term vision. This year just straight up sucked. But the reward, the silver lining in that, is that you did get this number 3 pick, and I don't think tossing it in this form of trade is the best way to utilize this. Now, let's start with the Paul George conversation. There is no way around that Paul George did underwhelm last year. He was not the problem with this Sixers team, but he certainly was not a part of the solution. Now, to select on exactly what he brought to the table from a statistical standpoint here, averaged 16.2 points per game, 5.3 rebounds, 4.3 assists, shot just 43% from the field, 35.8% from the 3, and that 27.7% from the corner 3 continues to stand out for me. That is an area that we believe Paul George will be capable of feasting, and he did not have those chances here. Now, again, when correlating where the season went off the rails, we have to circle this conversation back to Joel Embiid. And to be fair to Paul George here, he was battling through injuries himself. Let's not forget about the 2 bone bruises that he suffered before the season even really got underway. He also mentioned on his podcast recently that he had a torn adductor that he was battling through here, and that doesn't even take into account some of the off-court stuff that was going on behind the scenes. I know there was some family situations going on with him on top of the fires going down in LA right in the midst of all of his housing and all that kind of conversation, his home where his family was living out there. There was a lot going on. That is not to excuse the performance on the court, but I do think it is noteworthy in this context. Now, when reflecting on Paul George's contract here, that this was year 1 of a 4-year, $212 million deal, that he's still on the books next year for $51 million, $54 million in the 26-27 season, and then a $56.5 million player option for the 27-28 season there. If the selling point is trying to cut this deal a little bit, I get the case. But what does not make sense to me is to sacrifice the 3rd pick in order to do so. I don't get the appeal of moving on from Paul George just for the sake of doing it. I don't see a pathway to improving the Sixers team, and even to walk through the motions with this Kevin Durant idea. Again, I get it. Kevin Durant's still a better overall basketball player at this stage of each of their careers, but you're making the same gamble that all of this is reliant on Joel Embiid's health. So why push the chips further into the middle, double down on this approach that Joel can just stay healthy, hopefully, when we already kind of know what the situation is? There's a world where Joel Embiid is his dominant self and Paul George is good enough as a co-star. There's also a world where Joel Embiid is not good enough to be himself, the best version of himself. And then you kind of made this trade for no reason and sacrificed a chance at that third pick. Now, the Lowry marketing conversation is a little bit different. And before I get to that exactly, let me lay out the Kevin Durant contract situation, which I do believe is important to the context here. To lay out what KD is making, you do shave some years off. That he's going into the final season, a $54.7 million cap hit next year. That is what he's on the books for. And to kind of reflect on what he brought to the table from production standpoint, still averaging 26.6 points, 6.0 rebounds, 4.2 assists, shot 52.7% from the field, 43% from three, 50.6% from the corner three. Kevin Durant is still every bit of the bucket he has always been. And again, he is the superior talent when having these conversations. But we got to do the cost and what the Sixers would have to sacrifice to bring this on. And don't even we also got to acknowledge that Phoenix, the position they're in, they're going to be itching for every piece of young talent that they can get back here. I don't believe the conversation would be as easy as Paul George and the third pick, signed, closed, sealed, delivered. I do think there'd be conversations of, we want Jared McCain. What would he have to do to get Tyrese Maxey involved in this deal? Those are the things that Matt Ishbia should be pushing for as a general manager, and not anything that I have any interest in from the Sixers' perspective. Now, the Lowry marketing conversation is a little bit different here. Not from a monetary standpoint, as Lowry did get paid, and to pull up that exact contract here, this just kicking into gear that next season on the books for $46 million, $46 million, $46 million, $49 million, and $53 million are the next 4 years of his contract. A 4-year, $195 million contract there. I like Lowry Markin a lot. I'm not sure if I like Lowry Markin at that type of price tag. And to lay out what he brought to the table, a pretty disappointing season for Lowry last year with the Jazz. He averaged 19.0 points per game, 5.9 rebounds, which is far lower than what his career average has been, 1.5 assists, shot 42.3% from the field, 34.6% from three, did shoot 41.7% from the corner. Now, I am a Lowry fan. I have articles dating back to when he was still playing with the Bulls, making the case why they need to pair him with Joel Embiid, with the appeal to me here being pretty clear that you can have Markkanen as a true power forward playing next to Embiid, who can space the floor, shoot that corner three, still help out on the rebounding, and he is capable of scaling up and playing a little bit of center in the right context of a roster there. I like Lowry as a player. I also don't see a world why the Utah Jazz would have any interest in getting involved in the Paul George business at this state in the game. When you think about the context of this Jazz team, they are heading for another year of tanking. And by the way, to tap into their little system they're building up over there, take a peek at BYU basketball and their relation to the Utah Jazz. That is worth going down a bit of a rabbit hole there. Essentially, to summarize it up, the Jazz owner is bankrolling BYU's overall NIL contracts. That's why they have a guy like AJ DeBansta, who's going to be next year's number one overall pick, paid $2 million for our guy here in Philadelphia, Rob Wright, who was very good for Baylor next year, and this guy I do believe is an NBA prospect. But they kind of have created this farm system that I do think is going to be very interesting to see how it transpires. Now, with that being said, obviously we get the context of the lottery, that is why these things are in place. They cannot handpick from that said farm system in the same way. You have to earn those draft picks, and they have to find a way to get the one pick, which I do think they will have all intentions of doing. But with that being said, what sense does it make from the Jazz perspective to bring in a guy like Paul George? Sure, he may not carry you to a title, but he will carry you out of that at least bottom tier mix where you are in the running for the first overall pick. And obviously it did not happen here in Philadelphia. But I also think it brings the question of why move on from Lowry Markkanen. There have been a million other opportunities or situations in which his market value was much higher than it is today. Now, I understand the contract dilutes that to a sense, but this all feels like a bunch of moving parts for me from the Sixers' perspective that none of them add up to the complete puzzle we want them to be. The goal of this draft should 100% be to get a player that can be a part of the long-term future. Lowry Markkanen is the closest out of these three guys that I'm talking about to that conversation, and if you really feel bullish on him having a return to play here, you can make the case for me. But are we sure that a guy like Ace Bailey or a guy like VJ Edgecombe doesn't end up in the long haul just a better basketball player than Lowry Markkanen? I know he's made an all-star game. I know he's a very good basketball player, but so are these guys. So when looking at how things are playing out, I just have a really hard time parting with this pick. Passing up on the chance to draft a guy like Ace Bailey or a guy like VJ Edgecombe. Even if you want to make the argument for guys like Kon Knueppel or Kamen Maluak there, I get the appeal to that. I don't see a world where it rapidly improves this Sixers team. This feels like a much bigger risk than the reward will pay out. So it's good to get into the sexy names. I'm glad that Daryl Morey continues to do his due diligence, work the margins, and figure out what is the best pathway here. But sometimes the best move is just not to outsmart yourself. And for the Sixers in this situation, I very well think that is sitting pat and making that selection. But do want to hear from you guys in the comments. Do you agree with me on that overall principle? Or are you willing to step back up to that poker table here? Make that all-in push. Bring me Kevin Durant and give this a real chance next year. To play a little bit of devil's advocate with myself, the East is going to be more wide open than ever before. The Jason Tatum out with the torn Achilles, and the Celtics going to go through some significant changes this offseason because of the cap and tax implications due to all the contracts on the books. Giannis Antetokounmpo set to leave Milwaukee here. That's another team out. The Cleveland Cavaliers, we know how talented they are from a regular season perspective, but we've seen their flaws from the postseason setting. The Knicks will be around. The Pacers will be around, but none of these teams are these juggernauts in the Eastern Conference that the Sixers should be afraid of, or at least attempting not, or at least afraid to put together a team to contend with here. So we'll see what ultimately happens from here, but do want to hear from your guys' thoughts in the comments. I do think we're going to have a million more rumors to break down ahead of the draft day, and cannot wait to dive into everyone. So let me know your guys' thoughts below. As always, appreciate you guys tuning into this video here. Make sure you're smashing the subscribe if you have not already. Drop a like on this video. I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.